Small plates. Today is day 5, and we're going to be talking about a pranayama practice today. I thought it was a nice day to do some breathing exercises, talk a little bit about breathing. I also want to clarify a couple of things I've been talking about. I've been talking about the kidneys a lot, and I realized I have to differentiate what that means, because the word kidney itself means something in Western medicine and it means something different in Eastern medicine. So 1989, I moved to the Bay Area and I started studying yoga. Well, I had been studying a little bit, but I started getting more into yoga and body work and Chinese medicine. And it was interesting at that time, there were only 2 yoga studios that I knew of in the whole of the city of San Francisco. It was so the Iyengar Institute, and there was one other one that I remember driving by. So I was doing yoga at small community center settings, and I remember taking classes at the Acupressure Institute where I was studying out there at the time in Berkeley. So anyway, the point is that there just was not a lot of yoga around, and there was also not a lot of Ayurveda around at that time. So, but there was this surge in information and places to study about Chinese medicine. So there was a lot of Chinese medicine out there at the time, and I really got into it and I started studying it. And one of the things that I learned is that the Chinese look at the kidney as an organ, but also as energy. So it's an energy flow that moves through your system, and it guides certain processes in your system, specifically your inherent or innate energy, and then how you distribute or how you use energy in your life. So it's not so much like the kidney organ. So I realized I've been talking about the kidney a lot, and I was like, I better clarify that, because otherwise you think like, oh, there's something, this is good for my kidneys, and it may or may not be good for the organ. The practices we were doing, like a lot of the breathing into the back, I think it probably has some benefit. But from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's definitely beneficial to the system of energy in your body, as opposed to sort of making sure you're filtering your fluids properly that the kidney does. The one thing where there is this correlation is that the adrenaline glands sit like these little hats on top of your kidney on both sides, and we do know that they have much to do with whether or not you can muster up energy when you need it. So there is some relevance to what I was talking about, but perhaps not in a Western medical context. And then, of course, in Ayurveda, we have concepts such as Pitta, the energy in the system, Tejas, the energy in the system, Agni, which has more to do with the fire of digestion. Those are very similar concepts to what you find in Chinese medicine or Eastern medicine in general, and different from what you find in Western, more scientific, in that Western scientific framework. Okay, so in terms of practices today, we've done some asanas and some other practices, and I thought, well, today seems like a nice day to work on breathing. So let's talk about breathing for just a minute before we jump in. I don't want to spend too long. I'm trying to see how long I've been on already. I don't want to spend too long doing this. There's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of myth around breathing in the yoga community. There's sort of this idea like there's only one way to breathe. This belly breathing is the best way of breathing. This understanding like you need to take in more oxygen as you're breathing in, when actually breathing is more controlled, at least autonomically, by the brainstem systems, the unconscious intrinsic systems that are trying to maintain a homeostatic balance in the system, right? They're trying to keep the system, because I'm constantly going out of balance, and you kind of have to adapt. It's constantly kind of adapting. And those are largely below the level of consciousness. When we start to do breathing practices, what we're trying to do is utilize the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, to start to gain behavioral control over the breathing process, over the respiratory process, and there's several benefits to doing that. So most of what the research shows is that just the process of taking behavioral control over the breath is beneficial to the nervous system. So what that means, let's put that simply, mindfulness of the breath benefits the system, right? So a lot of the research, it doesn't come down conclusively about what the right breathing practice is. Rather, it's awareness of breathing that seems to be beneficial. I think that's really interesting when you look at it. So it's like you could do lots of different breathing practices, but it's the awareness that's beneficial. Why is that beneficial? Because as you're aware of the breath, you start to be aware of the sensations in the body, and then you can adapt the breath to the needs of those sensations in the body. So rather than having lots of different fancy pranayama practices, the simpler ones, I've always found the simpler ones are incredibly profound. You know, I just did that 30-day pranayama challenge, so I did all sorts of stuff with that. That's all on YouTube if you want to watch more of it. I also have an ebook about the subtle secrets of pranayama. So there's so much to it, and yet it boils down to awareness. The other thing that the research demonstrates pretty much across the board in most of the studies is that getting to somewhere about a 6 breath per minute cycle seems to put us in an optimal parasympathetic state in the system. Now, of course, that's not, you know, that's going to be variable, because that's not accounting for gender and weight and age and all of those things that are part and parcel of why we breathe differently. But most people breathe between 12 and 15 times a minute. And when we get that down to about 6 times a minute, we tend to put the nervous system into more of an optimal state. So what's 6 times a minute? It's about a 10-second breath. The yogis say, take that, and can you do it in all different ratios? And then when you've done that, you have mastered that ratio. You've mastered that part, which I think is interesting. I also think it's very beneficial to work with your breathing threshold and get to a place where you can not push your breath, but optimize or expand or slow down the breath. So getting to a place where you're doing 3 breaths a minute or 2 breaths a minute for a small amount of time is actually kind of beneficial for the system, as long as it's done in a way where you're not pushing the breath and spilling from parasympathetic over to sympathetic. That's when you start pushing your heart and creating problems in the system. You know, and the pH balance, I talked about that for just a moment. A lot of times we think oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Actually, it's much more nuanced and subtle than that, and the amount of carbon dioxide in your system has to do with the pH balance of the cells in the system. So and usually the body knows exactly what it needs, because it's always trying to find that homeostatic balance, right? Homeodynamic balance. So it's pranayama is tricky, and with as much stress as we have in our lives, we want to make sure that we're not putting further stress on the system by doing risky pranayama practices. All that's to say that we're just going to do a simple one today. So the simple practice today is we're going to start with 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Go ahead and get rolling with that as I'm talking. And the 4 counts in could be 4 seconds. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Something like that could be useful. I have a metronome timer on my phone, which I love using when I'm doing breathing. It's like a little wood block, click, click, click. If I can find it, I'll put it on the notes on the Facebook post. But I really like that, listening to a little bit of a sound, so you get your numbers right and you feel really smooth. Now, most people have a longer exhale than inhale. So just this practice, 4 in, 4 out, can be very nourishing to the nervous system. Give a little bit, bring a little more energy into the system. The yogis call this Brahmana, and it would be it's parasympathetic, right? Which means relaxation response. You're sort of increasing the relaxation response in a nourishing way. I always talk about nourishing and stimulating, which are 2 different concepts in yoga, Chikitsa, the yoga therapies, as well as Ayurveda. Nourishing is like soup, stimulating is like coffee, We're looking for the soup right now to nourish the system, to nourish the energy system, to relieve some of that fatigue and adrenal exhaustion. So 4 in, 4 out. I hope you've been doing that while I've been chatting. If you want to add just a little more oomph to it, you take a pause at the top. Short pause. So 4 in, pause for 1 or 2, and then 4 out. You don't need to do this very long, maybe 10 breaths. Pause for 1 or 2, and 4 out. All the breathing is through your nose, of course. Listening to a very soft sound of the ocean in your breath can be useful. Okay, so you've been doing it for a while, so just let go of all the numbers now and take a moment and notice how you feel after doing the practice. Please leave a question or a comment. I'll be back tomorrow. I think we'll continue some of this conversation about breathing just a little bit more. And I also have this book I want to talk about that I think is really useful, Adrenaline Thyroid Revolution. I don't know if I'll get to it tomorrow, but I'll definitely get to it at sometime in the 14-day series. Thank you for being here. See you tomorrow.